Story time, everybody. All right. So when you read this Luma page, there's three hearts there. One was on a partner that brings in more income and is the main provider. Maybe the partner makes themselves more available than the other person with quality time. So, and the other one's always busy. And then maybe one partner is always the support system, listening and things like that, and they burn out because the other person's the one that needs a lot of the processing support. They don't have a therapist or they don't have their other source. So I'm going to start off with one of the needs that weren't met in our relationship when we started dating, and it's met now. Like we made a lot of good progress. But it was a really hard contention point, like point of tension for us. And that one was time and presence. Steph, as you may or may not know, is an entrepreneur, and she has to work her ass off. Like just, when you're starting a new company and you have it's like your baby. And that was always a point of tension because I always felt like, at the end of the day, when she'd be back, when she'd come back, I would be getting the shell of a version of Steph because she'd be super tired and wouldn't be able to like be present with me. And so in our first year of dating, I was always like torn between how do I be the best partner to support you and your dreams and also advocate for myself that like I need your presence and time. How do we actually get there? And so one of the ways, that I started to have that conversation was to start talking about like what's our long-term goal? Like I need time, I want your presence. And I had to let her know the impact too. Like when I don't have your time and presence, like it hurts. I know like this business is important to you, but it still really sucks. And so that's kind of how I started it. And it needed to, Steph, you had to let me know, like, what was your side? So when I first told you that, like, what was that like?
Um, when Kato first told me this, I think I had a pretty defensive reaction, and so I'm just sharing very honestly because I feel like uh,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know which side. It seems like there's a range of people on kind of like Kato's end where it's like I'm not getting my needs met, and there's also people on the other side where it's like you're the one kind of causing or like adding to the unmet need, right? And so I was the one in the conversation that was adding to that. And when Kato first initially shared this with me, I was pretty defensive and I was really irritated because it comes from the place of like you don't understand what I am experiencing and what sacrifices I have to make. And this can be relevant to you if you're in school, you're in a season of your life where like
Right.
you have a bunch of stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like there is no way out. And simultaneously, I know I also felt guilty and I also felt bad because the story that I had about myself was I'm a really bad partner. I can't show up for this person in the ways that they need. I can tell this person is hurting, but I also don't have the capacity, nor do I have like what I felt like was needed in order to fulfill those needs. So we're in a very kind of hard rock and a hard place, I guess, because it's like I can see all of that, but I always also was so strapped, I didn't know how to actually make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think I'll just pause there. That's our first like dilemma of the day, where like the situation isn't gonna change overnight, and y- like both points are really valid. And where do you go from there? So
So I want to know what was like going through your head as
yeah,
processing through this. Because like for context, I don't change. I don't even change in a month. I don't even change in like 3 months.
no, it
So
took like a whole
it
year.
took like a
Yeah,
year. And so like how
yeah.
did you sort of work through that? Because I think one of the big questions that always comes up when people are in this situation is like, I don't know when it's gonna happen. Like, do I trust that's gonna happen? Do I leave in this situation? Like, how do I go about that? And so would love for you to comment on that.
Yeah. I mean, the context always matters. Um, and the context for this situation was, um, man, I felt like you were on the same page as me, that you wanted to actually, that you didn't want this kind of life, you know, that a life where you were working so hard and you were so burned out. Um, like you wanted to get to like a better place where things would be lighter, not as busy, and you would have more presence. So like, I think I knew, because I knew there was a long term goal that gave me some security, but there was still, it was still really a hard pill to swallow. You know, like I really took a moment and thought like, there's no guarantees here. Like Steph can entrepreneur for the rest of her life, and she likely will. And am I willing to be down for that, you know, like with whatever comes with that, the instability of like inconsistent income and stuff like that. And like, you know, it's a different beast when you're with a dream chaser and a builder. So I just had to sit with myself and be like, okay, like, do I accept this person for who she is, and I willing to work with her along the way to get there. um and so we had to set up some accountability systems to like give me some kind of security towards where we were headed. But in the moment, yeah, I felt really skeptical, you know, like I felt skeptical, and like um you know, my love for you is really strong too, so there's that side as well. And so I wanted to paint that picture because from another angle, if you talk about attachment styles, I'm anxiously attached, which means that um, hashtag abandonment issues, like in the past, you know, they're not as like strong anymore because Steph's wonderful. But when the attachment wound is really strong, that can trump, like it can be stronger than the unmet need. Like the security of being in a relationship with a partner can be stronger than the unmet need, which can sometimes keep me in the game, you know, like to keep me like there. And that's what happened to me in previous relationships. But for this one, like I knew it was in for the long haul. I know Steph is the person I want to be with. So it was more so about like, how do we figure out like a game plan um, to get there? How's that?
I thought that was great.
Okay, cool.
Um, yeah, I think what I wanted to comment on with this kind of stuff is that like it takes a lot of conversation. So like Cato did not just bring this up one time. Like we like
Dude,
I've
this was
gone
like weekly.
yeah, there was a point
Yeah.
where it was like weekly and like I don't know if y'all have been there where it's like it seems like we're having the same conversation like
Mm-hmm.
and again and again and like nothing seems to be changing. And I think there's and so there the reason why I highlight that is because I mean we're in a better place now, but it's taken a really long time I think to be there. And part of the work when you're in this situation is I guess at least on my side, there is a little bit of like frustration because it's like I feel like I'm doing my best, but my best does not feel like it's enough. And so that's a really tough tension, I think, to be in on my side. And then with Cato, it's like, you know, he's asking for what he needs, right? Like it's not like he's not doing that or advocating, but
Hold
he's
up.
getting it met.
Let me do that part. Here was the dilemma for my part, right? Like as a partner supporting you with your dreams, right? And also like um wanting to like really put myself in your shoes in your situation. To Cynthia's point earlier, I didn't want to add more stress and more of the load onto your situation when I knew it was already hard for you to try to chase your dreams and to make it work. I didn't want to add on more stress. So I always face this dilemma of like, how often do I bring this up? When do I bring it up? Do I bring it up when the feeling is there and it's like a little pinch and it's simmering? Or do I wait until it gets a little bit bigger and try to figure out the most delicate way to say it? And that was like the dance that we were trying to figure out at the beginning of this year. And I wanted to share that because for me, there's something inside of me that felt like I needed to continue to advocate for myself, otherwise I wouldn't be heard. And that's what made me continue to bring this up multiple times, like a lot of times, to be honest. Even though we just had a conversation the week before, but like reflecting on it now, like I had a wound where I used to not speak up in my past relationships. And I would just be a doormat and literally just try to be really supportive and put the cape on and call myself like a really great partner by supporting the other person and not putting myself into the picture at all. And that just burned me out. So in this relationship, it was like a swing of the pendulum. I am going to go from one side to the other. And I just need to say what I need to say, even though it was really hard. Um, and it was wrestling through that. It's like, okay, I'm going to say it once. Okay. Then after you say it twice, 3 times, 5 times, okay, I'm a lot stronger at doing it. Now I'm going to say it all the time. So then I started to feel a lot more confident. And there was like a phase where I need to actually calibrate around like, okay, is this too much now? Like, is it unproductive because I'm saying it way too much? Or like, am I just getting better in surfacing what I need? Right. So that's something that we kind of had to calibrate with in conversation with each other on when is too much? And like, is there anything new that's happening in the conversation? Or are we just like recycling things and causing each other pain when the situation can't actually like immediately change? Yeah. So yeah, so time. I think what really changed this year was that like there was buy-in from both sides. Steph wanted to actually be healthier. She wanted more time. She didn't want to be working this hard. Um, and we would find ways to do that. So like I would find ways of how I could support her. In our world, it looked like me helping her prioritize her tasks and schedule for the week because running a company is really hard and she feels responsible for everything. And so like I would help her like de-scope and deprioritize things that she needed to take on from a work perspective and also from a life perspective. Like you're hanging out with too many people this week. You scheduled way too many people. Like, hey, like I think you can let them know not in this season and you just got to do it for you. Right. So it's like being a second brain for her to really like protect her bandwidth and to be proactive in creating space for her to actually just breathe, which is can be really hard for someone who's super busy and like in a more of like a survival building state, right? um so that's one of the ways that where we started. Steph, I wonder if you wanted to add anything to like our
I
goals and stuff.
Yeah, I think like the point that Kato is making here with all of this is just like how can you get creative with the ways that you show up for each other,
Yeah.
right? Like it's not like yes, it's great if you want to advocate and say like hey, my needs are not being met. Okay, awesome. That's like one thing, right? But just repeatedly saying that is also not going to like ultimately change. And
Yeah.
so it's just like how can you and whoever it is that you're working with like collaborate on the ultimate solution that you guys are working towards. And when we make it a collaborative effort versus just like, oh, I have to shoulder all the things I have to change and it's all my fault, that also doesn't really, I think, shift a lot of things. So I was very lucky that Cato was very open, I think, to supporting me, even though I didn't necessarily expect it. But I think because both of us had many conversations about what the end goal was, then there was, I think, buy-in from both sides. I think to be able to make that happen. I think that that may not be the case for everyone. I think there are some people in this room that are with people or around people who may not necessarily agree to collaborate. And we're kind of going to get into that a little bit later on. But I think it would be nice to hear another example, Kato. So like if you want
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, I'll talk about the financial example. That's like another one, right? I first talked about time because time was the one need that was like the biggest boss, right? If you don't have time, you can't be there and have presence and like show love. It's a little bit harder to feel that. But financial is one of the other ones. It was challenging for me because, you know, I've been saving up for like a really long time. And you know, with Steph being an entrepreneur, like the income is, it has its seasons, right? And so I want things like a home, with like something that I used to really want, you know, and like to really save and build wealth so that I could retire early, you know, like those are things that like I've been taught and have wanted. But you know, as our relationship progressed, something that became a reality is that the pace to get there would be a lot slower. So I had to reset my expectations in relationship with Steph and let her know the impact of not being able to get there, like how that's affecting me. And um, it was really hard, you know, because financial conversations reveal a lot about what we each value. And it's always, you know, money can be a very emotionally charged conversation. And so I would say that like the financial need part was really around understanding what was Steph's plan for having more consistent income. Because with what comes on an entrepreneurship journey, there's, it's not only just the money, but it's also like the health and the time, which is like, we just talked about that on the first bit, but this bit is also like the financial component as well. And how I approached that was to really talk about things from like goal setting, like what do we want together and how do we build towards that and how do we contribute to that over time, and to just put it out there versus not writing it down. And I think that's really where we started, so that we could be clear on what what both of us wanted. Okay, like I learned that I might want to get like land in Idaho to get water. I don't know, just like some random thing because we think the world's gonna run out of water. We might need to buy some land in Idaho to freaking like provide water to our friends in the future because the world's ending. Okay. So like, but major nice to have. Okay. We were like, oh, that might be like what, 60K? And we were like, shit, yeah, we're not going to do that. So we then did like, okay, let's start with maybe the wedding. And we were like, okay, we've been asking our friends, how much your weddings cost? Some say 65K, some say 30K, some do it in the Philippines or some Southeast Asian country, and they're like, it's 10K. And other people, you know, it's been a lot. So we kind of sat there and we were like, how much do we want to spend on ours? And so we started to have those conversations as well, and how to get creative around it. So I share all that because this is a very practical way to get clear on what the plan is to get the need net, the need met, without it being more feelings based, because you know that can get messy sometimes. um Steph, I wonder if you had anything to say to that.
Yeah, so I think with conversations around money, because it's a very charged subject, um when we first had the conversation, I just want to be very explicit that like um we couldn't even get to the planning yet.
Mm,
So like just context, like I just want to
yeah,
share this because I know
right.
it seems like, oh hey, we went from A to like freaking Z, but like the first conversation was literally us driving from OC, I think, to like LA or something. And then
Mm,
in the car, we just started talking about how like Kato was feeling like some type of way about like how I was showing up financially like, in the relationship, but we weren't even directly speaking to it. We were just, he was just kind of like, yeah, like this not, I don't
yeah,
know, I'm not sure, you know? And
yeah,
so like I just want to share that because that's very real to sort of stumble through these kinds of conversations. And I think also like that led to another real, very real conversation that led to another one. And so I think that like my point in sharing all of this is like you want to you can't do it overnight. And so I think there's an element of this that's just like you want to also set up expectations for the conversations, because oftentimes people think like I'm gonna do one go and have this whole conversation, but when you start having a conversation, there's literally like, I don't know, is it like an octopus or something? There's like multiple legs, I think,
Yeah,
to this thing.
yeah,
And so just like being patient with like how long this process is, multiple conversations,
mhm,
revisiting conversations. Because one of the things that I admit to being guilty of is like I want a one and done type of thing. Like I just want to have the conversation, be done with it, bye. But it's just like that doesn't really allow for the space for somebody to, comment on what's going on with themselves before we even go into practical like problem solving. And oftentimes this conversations around the emotions has to happen before you go into like problem solving. So just wanted to
yeah.
add like context too.
Yeah, that was really good to point out. I was talking about the solving part, and there was like probably 5 to 10 conversations on the emotional part before we even got there. Yeah, I gave you the Cliff Notes version. Um, yeah,
Um,
the emotional part's really messy because, like, to what Steph was saying, I was kind of dancing around and stepping on leaves, and I was kind of just like, like I don't know how I feel about this, you know? I was like presenting it really nicely when deep down, I was very concerned about um our like financial future and how we would contribute. And I just felt like that was too intense for me to like put on her. But we eventually got there. Um, so I think that one was important to highlight because, when I zoom out on the relationship and think about the needs that were unmet on my side, which was like time and money, um, to endure and like make it through this time, I needed a big picture, which is like what we talked about, like where we wanted to be. And I also needed to see the exchange in terms of like, I had to translate reciprocity between the both of us. Like, how do I do this so that I can see, so that I can sustain myself as well? Like, that was one of the ways. And an example of that is like, Steph's great at listening to me. Um, she's great at supporting my dreams as well. Um, and she did her best really like to make me like food because I'm like really bad at cooking for myself and I always like forget to eat and stuff. So like there are these little but very significant things along the way that I had to remember and not just focus on the unmet need, otherwise I would turn into a demon, and the truth is like I actually became a demon like sometimes, because it's just like uh it just got the best of me. And I think that like that is a very real thing, that is a very human thing, that folks can go through. But there's also a level of accountability I needed to have too with myself to get better and to let her know that like, hey, I'm sorry, like I know what we agreed upon and I'm going to do better next time, and this is how I'm going to do it. um you want to say something?
yeah. Um,
Yeah.
I wanted to comment on like when we have these experiences, right? Like Kato's story around me is like, oh, she doesn't have enough time, she doesn't have enough presence. And I think that it's important to recognize that like we cannot never hurt somebody. I think it like happens in our relationships that we make mistakes or we do things that like don't fulfill another person's needs. And so I say this because I want us to move away from like I always need to meet a person's needs. It's not necessarily that, but like sometimes you will drop the ball, and that's also very human, and something that if we were forwarding kind of into the future, like Kato is now in a sort of phase where he's trying to reset, I think, his stories around me. So if you guys have been to a previous like session, you've heard about this, like where the impact of that was so real that he's still recovering from like that story that he like has about me. And so I'm wanting to like comment on that because I want like people to know that these things like that we are experiencing when we don't meet another person's needs are very real. And there's also sort of like a healing process after where we have to like sort of shift and change the stories that we have about each other as we are evolving. And that's an ever ongoing work that like Cato has to do like with me because of the heavy impact early on like in our relationship. So I say this so that when you're reflecting on the relationship you're thinking about, recognizing that just because a problem is solved in this moment right now doesn't mean that a person's idea of who you are has been updated like quite yet, if that makes sense. And so it takes some time to also like move through that too. And we explicitly share all these things because this is a process that I think is not seen. It's more like internal, and like we're bringing it sort of outward so that we can sort of visibly see what is happening in a relationship, and also like what you can do. And a lot of this has to do with like verbalizing a lot of these things, like working through these conflicts, repairing, and all of that happens under the umbrella of like communication.
Right.
And I just wanted to like kind of share that context too about this specific situation.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that. I mean, we've done our fair share of like therapy, coaching, and RBTL. You know, we know how to communicate, and we still there's still very human aspects that it's like the reptilian instinct that kind of just takes into overdrive and it solidifies. And for me, yeah, that's like what you just said, the unmet needs of time and presence. When there are moments in present day where you aren't present, that still happens. And just the other week, like this is another one of our sessions, I had to let you know, hey, when you said you were going to be home by this time and like to be able to like, make some food, but you didn't show up for me, like I started to have this story around like, oh man, like you're not responsible or you're not able to deliver on what you say, even though like I know it's not that, but there's still this story. And so like, it becomes a language that you and your partner or the other person has to develop on how to squash those stories and how to make those stories explicit so that you're not reading between the lines with each other. Because what I used to do, even if it was a very small story, it would somehow still show up on my face. Like you can tell when I'm upset at you. Like it just leaks out of me. Like I become a little passive aggressive. Actually, I become very passive aggressive. Um, I don't talk. And like it's kind of just like I just want to like be left alone. And so something that I try to do to not put you through the guessing game and like the hurt was to at least take an action where I could minimize the hurt, even though it still will hurt, which is to let you know that I have a story about you right now. I just need to let you know I'm working on it, and it's not about you. I know it's not about you, but I just need a moment. And sometimes that's really hard for the other person to stomach, right? And it's also hard for me to say that thing because it's like, why the fuck should I say this? Like it's only going to sour the mood. But what we're both committed to is to actually make things a little bit more explicit so that we can figure out how to build a muscle around tension and trust, because we're really trying to just be honest with each other and not make the other person feel like they're in trouble when they're actually not in trouble. So I think I'll stop there with that story and see if you wanted to say anything more or if the chat had any questions.
I don't have anything, but I wanted to share from the other side.
Yeah,
Um,
should.
questions. And so like so far, I think Kato and I, as you can sort of like gather from our conversations, we're pretty collaborative with the way that we connect and repair and do all the things. We've both done a lot of work, in inner work, you know, through coaching, therapy, RBTL, all the stuff. But I think for some of us here, you may be dealing with people who may not reciprocate or may not be able to meet you like where you are. And so I kind of wanted to speak a little bit to like what that can look like. And so I'm gonna use my previous relationship as an example. In my previous relationship, I felt like a lot of my emotional needs like weren't being met. And so I don't sit here with like blame necessarily on the other person, but I think it became very explicitly clear after 4 years together that you know, things were not moving, I think, in the direction that I wanted. And so I get this question a lot from folks from like previous sessions too. It's just like, how do you know when to keep going and when not to keep going? And Kato, I think you should speak to this too, like after I share this. And I think that's something that happens when we're in this situation is, at least for me, I know I was making excuses for my partner at the time where I was like, oh, this person's too busy, this person's like, you know, has is managing the MBA as well as like full-time work, and like we're trying to renovate this apartment together, like we don't have time for like this. And so it kept getting pushed off and pushed off and pushed off until I realized like, oh, I'm just holding on to a lot of resentment and like frustration and like anger at this person. And so I think there's like 2 points that I'm trying to make here, which is one, you want to talk about these things like early and often. Often, I mean, talking about it is better than not talking about it. Because then once you start talking about it, it's like when you start working on it. And so early and often I've realized is like the way to go. Like, even though it was really freaking annoying, especially with me and Kato, when I was like, he kept bringing stuff up and I'm just like, dude, I'm doing my best. Like, I need you to like chill. But like, it was better that he communicated that than not. Whereas like in my past relationship, um, I would bring it up every so often, and then there would sort of be like, yeah, I'll kind of like a I'll do better kind of energy, but then we fall back into the same place, same pattern. And so there was an eventuality, I think, in that relationship. And this can be, I think, said for many different relationships because they change and evolve in different seasons. So I've also had this kind of phase with my parents as well, where it's like, okay, well, my need is clearly not being met in this relationship. I had to be very honest about that. And then the other honest thing that I had to be honest about with myself was, you know, when we look at people, it's very easy to be like, oh, you're not meeting my need. Like you suck, right? Like you should change. But I think something that we don't often think about is like what is in like your control and like what can you do about the situation. So I think the 2 questions that came up at that point is like, are these needs that I have, can I source them from other places? Can I ask other people for support? Because again, your partner can't really be everything for you. Um, and if I can't, am I willing to accept this person as they are, where they are right now? And in that past relationship, when I was looking at the patterns and the arc of this person's like efforts, I had to be honest that the pace in which this person was going was not a pace that I was willing to wait for. And I just want to be very honest about that because I think oftentimes it's like, oh, I want to hold on, I want to hold on, I want to hold on, without like realizing like or being honest about like where I truly am at and like how deep the pain actually was. And so I share all this because I think it's important to think about it from like both sides because you have choices here, right? It's like I can continue to move on, and Cato can comment on like what he decided helped him to move on. I mean, to stay to hold on. And then I made the decision to actually leave that relationship because I knew I was not going to be able to wait for this person to shift and to change. And it was not fair for me to continue to hold on to this idea that you need to like change. And so I ultimately made the decision to not continue to progress. So that's like one example. And then the last tiny bit that I wanted to add was um with parents, I think there's also like different seasons as well. And so sometimes you don't necessarily have a choice to leave a relationship. Your parents kind of stay your parents forever. And so in the relationships where there's kind of like that type of relationship going on, I think the question then becomes what boundaries need to be set in order to actually make this relationship like workable. And so with my parents, there were phases where I was just like, you know what, I need to actually be distant at this point in time for a specific period in order to just heal a little bit and attune to my own needs, and then I'm willing to like return back when I have more bandwidth and capacity. But again, like all of this comes back to like how honest are you when you're facing these types of challenges and conversations, and being, you know, brutally honest about like what you're actually able to hold and not hold. And so just want to share like all of that, and I'm going to pass it over to Kato because I feel like you're in that situation where you decided to keep going, and when you're in your hardest times, like, you know, what did you keep in mind to actually like continue to keep going, because it was really hard.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking of that right now. I mean, it still comes up today. Like it never like really has gone away from me. I think it just is more about like redirecting my focus and how I've reframed the overall like uh situation. So like for me, what I've chosen to do is recognize that like things are not going to change immediately. We have some goals set in place. And I just it's not going to help either of us if I just make things harder when we have established like agreements with each other and how we'll get there. When are we going to do it? Um, so then it just becomes like, how can I relish in like the goodness of the relationship and everything that we have, you know, and all the progress that we have made together, all the progress that you have made. And I think that is a really important thing to be on the side of people that are in my situation where you're requesting an unmet need to be met, is to also like reinforce the progress and to celebrate into it because it took time to get there. And I think sometimes I can get into a trap of like, I don't know if it's like an Asian parenting thing or like a standard thing, but like at least in my household, like to really get rid of like certain behaviors, it was like they were super hard on me until it was like eliminated. So it's like a really hard disciplinary environment. And I noticed myself creating that with Steph. Like I started to kind of fixate and scrutinize when she wasn't making progress and when she made a mistake, when I was like, whoa, 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 like I gotta zoom out. Like there is a lot of like progress here. And sometimes like, you know, it's just owning up to it and being like, hey, sorry, like I'm being an asshole, you know, and like,
I'm out for that.
yeah. And she calls me out for that. And we gotta just like, you know, work again as a team to be like, you know, you let me know like you understand that it's important to me. And I also let you know that like I'm sorry like for making it harder, you know. So because I don't want to demoralize you for doing your best, you know, like that's all we can ask for of the other person. Um, so that's basically like how it's been going, and I can testify that Steph's been doing a great job, which is why we're able to talk to you all about this today.